What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So, today I wanted to talk about the Boston Celtics. We're going through these Eastern Conference teams who are in the middle of the playoff picture right now and kind of going through their rest of their season. We're nearing down to the end here. We've kind of talked about most of these teams that are still battling for a playoff spot. But here we are with the Boston Celtics, and they are right in the thick of the playoff race, sitting at 6th in the Eastern Conference right now, trying to avoid that play-in tournament and trying to potentially get up even higher so that they can avoid the three best teams in the Eastern Conference in the first round. So let's go through the Celtics. They only have 6 games left in their season and see what they have left to do and where they might end up. So let's take a look at the standings. The Celtics are currently sitting at that 6th spot in the Eastern Conference. They are currently tied with the Miami Heat for that 6th seed. They have the same win-loss record. They played the same amount of games. They got the same amount of games going down the stretch. And the big news here is that they play the Celtics and the Heat play each other twice more next week, or I guess this weekend, Sunday and Tuesday. There are 2 games here between the Celtics and the Heat. And those are going to go a long way towards determining who is going to get the higher seed at the end of the day. The Celtics beat the Heat in the first matchup of the season. That was near the start of the year. It was a 2-point game, and Boston ended up winning that one. And so Miami will have to beat them twice in order to gain the tiebreaker. And if they do end up beating them twice, it is likely that the Heat will finish ahead of the Celtics in the standings. So those are 2 huge games, could potentially decide who gets to avoid the play-in tournament and who has to play in it. So we'll get into that more in a second, but those are 2 huge games. They're 3 games up on Charlotte for the 8th, so it's pretty unlikely that they'll end up falling further than 7th. Looks like 7th would be the furthest they'd be able to fall. They also do have the tiebreaker over Charlotte. They won that season series 2-1. So even if they really struggle down the stretch and the Hornets play well, you have the tiebreaker anyway, and so even if Charlotte ends up with the same record, the Celtics will be seated ahead of them. And then Atlanta, they do not have the tiebreaker against, so that is another big one. They're a game behind the Hawks right now. Atlanta won that season series 2-1, so they will have the tiebreaker over Boston. And then the New York Knicks are another team. They actually play their last game of the year. The Knicks and the Celtics will play each other, and they're 2 games up right now, the Knicks are, and that last game of the year will decide the tiebreaker between the 2 teams as well. So there's a chance here that Celtics could even get up to 4 because, as we kind of talked about the other day, the Knicks have a pretty tough schedule, especially coming up in their next few games. So we'll have to see how that shakes out, but there is a good chance that the Celtics could even end up in that 4-5 matchup. Maybe not passing Atlanta, but potentially to pass the New York Knicks. That is a possibility. So here's the schedule. We kind of already talked about a few of these games, but upcoming here, they have Friday, so the day that you're watching this Friday, they will play at Chicago. The Bulls, who just got Zach LaVine back, and they're still trying to make it into that play-in tournament. They did play a game Thursday evening, so this will be the second night of a back-to-back for the Bulls. But LaVine is, rested coming off of his stay in health and safety protocols, and they still feel like they probably have a chance to get into that 10th spot there. They're a couple games back of Indiana and Washington, but there still is some hope for them in order to get up. So the Bulls are going to be desperate here, and if they lose that game, if they lose really any games the rest of the year, they're kind of out of it. So we'll see how well they come out, but the Bulls and the Celtics always tend to kind of play each other close, at least this year, so we'll have to see how that one shakes out there. And then, like I said, the 2 games against the Heat, they're both at home, which is good for Boston there, on Sunday and Tuesday, so they have a day off in between to rest and prepare. Both of those teams are going to bring that playoff intensity, and that matchup there is going to decide who is going to be the higher seed, pretty much, just because there's not that many games left in the year. You would assume these teams, both of these teams are going to play well down the stretch, and I would assume that whoever gets the better of the other in these 2 games here, and even if they split, it's probably going to go the way of the Celtics just because they already have the tiebreaker. But if they drop those 2 to Miami, then you're looking pretty dangerous, and it's looking like the Heat might be able to leapfrog you there. Then quick little road trip to Cleveland and Minnesota, which is lucky because those are 2 of the worst teams in the league. The Cavs are, not playing very well. That is the second night of a back-to-back. You have to travel, so we'll have to see how well they do with that one. But the Cavs are not very good, so they should be able to get a win there. And then they have 2 days off before playing Minnesota on the road as well. And at that point, the Timberwolves are probably going to be trying to lose as much as possible, desperately trying to stay in the top 3 so they don't have to give away their draft pick. And then you have to do a back-to-back in New York, and that will decide the tiebreaker between those 2 teams. So really what you're looking at here is if the Celtics go 6-0 to finish their season, there is a very good chance that they will get the 4 seed because the Knicks, like I said, are entering a rough stretch. They just lost to the Nuggets the other day, and they have the Suns, the Lakers, and the Clippers upcoming, and then they also have this game against the Celtics to close things out here. So if the Knicks even drop like one of their next 3 games and the Celtics are able to beat them in that last game of the year, that would be enough, assuming that they can take care of business against Miami, to potentially vault them up to that 4 seed. So Boston still has a chance here after kind of struggling all year and being a little bit underwhelming. They still have a chance to have home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. And if they do go 6-0 here, I think they probably will end up getting there, in my personal opinion, just because, you know, the teams that are above them, specifically New York and even Atlanta, does have sort of a tough schedule. I mean, Atlanta could go undefeated and finish ahead of them. But you know, it's always a possibility. So they want to get into that 4-5 matchup because kind of what I talked about the other day with the Knicks is you want to avoid Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and Brooklyn, who are the top 3. So if you get into that 4-5, you give yourself a much better chance of making it into the second round rather than having to go play one of those teams in the first round of the playoffs. So the priority for Boston should not only be to avoid the play-in tournament, but get up to that 4-5 seed. You're going to have to get ahead of Atlanta or New York to do it, but like I said, the Knicks are kind of in danger of slipping here. So assuming that the Celtics can capitalize, they have themselves in a good position to potentially move up in the standings. So just to kind of talk about the Celtics season as a whole, it's been a weird one for sure. They've gone through rough patches. They just had a stretch where they played really, really well, and now they've kind of come back down to earth recently. They had won like 7 or 8 in a row, and then they've now kind of gone up and down a little bit. They recently came off a 3-game losing streak where they lost to the Hornets, who were still down LaMelo and Gordon Hayward. And then they lost to OKC, which was just a horrible loss that obviously you should not be losing to OKC at this point in the season. I think that's the only game that the Thunder have lost in like the past 2 months, or the Thunder have won, excuse me. So it's pretty... the Celtics are just so up and down this year that it's tough to it's tough to know what to make of them just because they've been so inconsistent. But like I said, they still could run the table and be a home court advantage team, which is kind of crazy considering how up and down they've been. But that's just how tight things are in the Eastern Conference right now. It's just everybody's got a shot. And if they do end up getting into a first round series against whether it's Atlanta or New York or whoever it is, you have still a good chance to make it to the second round. Now, a lot of it does depend on health and how well their players are playing, because sometimes their stars just don't show up. Tatum has had some really big games recently. Jaylen Brown has sort of been struggling, and now he's injured. He's kind of banged up. He's going to miss tomorrow's game against the Bulls, but we'll see when he's able to come back. And then Kemba Walker, who has been really in and out of the lineup. He's been dealing with ticky-tack injuries, and his knee's been acting up on him, and he's kind of been inconsistent when he's been out there, but at some points he's been really good and looking like the Kemba that we saw in Charlotte, and some points he looks like he shouldn't even be the starter. So you never really know what you're getting, specifically with Kemba, but with some of these other Celtics as well. But this team clearly has a high ceiling. I mean, we saw them in the East Finals last year. They went toe-to-toe against Miami and ended up losing that series in a very competitive 6 games. So this is still a very good basketball team. It's just they've kind of had a weird year, dealt a lot with health and safety. I think they have the most games missed due to health and safety protocols by far, I believe, much more than any other team. They missed a ton of guys. Tatum himself had, the thing that YouTube might get mad at me for saying, and he had to miss a long time, and he had an interview recently where he talked about how he has to use the inhaler before games, and he's still dealing with the effects of it. And so it's just been a weird year for them. And if you don't know, I'm sure a lot of people don't remember this, but I actually picked Jason Tatum to win the MVP this year just because I was very bullish on this team. I thought they were going to be better than they were last year, and I thought that Tatum was going to take another leap this season because he looked really, really good last year for that stretch late in the season before the suspension happened, and then he kind of, I thought that he was going to come out and play well this season, and like I said, him kind of having to miss some time with the protocols and stuff, and the team as a whole having to deal with all this, and there's been some roster turnover, and they've had to deal with changes, and lots of guys in and out of the lineup for health and safety. The team has never really come together for Tatum to have that season that I kind of expected him to have, so that was a little disappointing, but I still still think that this is a scary team come playoff time. They have a very high ceiling. I think Tatum himself is a superstar in his own right, and is capable of being the best player in any given playoff series. Not that he's like a better player than Giannis or Embiid or KD or Kyrie or whatever, but he can get really hot and outplay people for stretches of time. And we've seen him do it in the past, and I think he's certainly very, very capable of doing that just because he has this skill set and he's big and he knows how to play. He's strong, he's a tough defender. He can shoot over people, and he can score at all three levels, and he's efficient. And I just really like Jason Tatum's game. I think he's come a long way. So with that being said, this team is still scary because they have Jason Tatum on the roster. That's just the type of player that he is and is going to be for the next 15 years. So there's that, but they've had kind of that up and down season. So who knows what version of the Celtics we're going to get going down the stretch and heading into the postseason because they've just been so inconsistent. But I would not want to match up with them in the first round just because of the potential that we know this team has. But yeah, I think that's about all I have on the Boston Celtics. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Celtics and how their season has gone and how they might finish the year. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. But yeah, with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.